Hey guys, welcome back. It's Jen, and today I'm going to show you how to paint a buttercream cake using stencils. So you're not really painting, you're kind of cheap painting, but it looks like a painting. So if you're not the best at drawing or painting yet in your life, or you just want to do something quick and get a big reward for little effort, this I find is the easiest way to go. Here's the tools you're going to need if you want to take a quick screenshot of this. I use Martha Stewart's layering stencil, so just make sure you get some kind of layering stencil if you don't want to do this design. Basically what that means is they match each other and one goes on top of the other, and one is less detailed, the other is more detailed. So you spray the less detailed one first, and then you spray the more detailed one on top of that. So I use the Wilton Color Mist Blue, even though I do have an airbrush machine. Not everybody wants to invest in that. So this is a great, easy way to airbrush without putting in a big investment. A lot of people use regular push pins, but I don't find these to be long enough. So I suggest the long T style pins because they just seem to hold it on the best, but you can have a different type of head, but it does need to have a head so it holds the stencil in tight. So the parchment paper and tape is so you can tape parchment paper on the edges of the stencil and cover up any of the design you don't want to show up on the cake. This is a really helpful tool. Also a quick note, I don't know if this is temporary, but they seem to be low at Michael's for the color mist. So, but there were a ton at Party City, so just want to let you know if you're having trouble at Michael's, they do sell them in other crafts or party stores. And they also come in a lot of different colors. There's also this and other brands online as well. We're going to be starting with a smooth frosted cake. So if you don't know how to do any of that, you can check out my tutorials. I have great tips and tricks how to smooth a cake. I usually say, you don't need a smooth cake for this. But for this one, you kind of do need a pretty smooth cake. Otherwise, it's not going to look quite right. So what's really important that you use an American crusting buttercream, because it's really important that the cake is dry to the touch so you can put the stencils on there and it won't smear it up. So by crusting, I mean that the very most outer layer is exposed to air and then crusts up and dries. It's nothing you can taste, it's such a thin layer, but it's enough that it's harder to nick up. And I have a ton more flavors of buttercream and cake if you want to try something else. So my cake has been cooling in the refrigerator for at least an hour, so that makes it nice and firm and crusted up so we can go ahead and put our stencil on the cake. Also make sure you do this where you can easily clean up the sides and tops of everything, because this overspray goes further than you'd think. So take your less detailed layer and put it on top of the cake. And it's most aesthetically pleasing if you don't put the main attraction in the center, so that's why I put the bird a little to the side. You may want to push down parts of the stencil with your fingers to make sure to get those details. Just make sure you don't hold your finger on there too long, because it will melt the frosting and it'll make a mark. So the detail I was really concerned about is the beak because it's so small. So we want to do just a really light dusting because we want to make sure our second layer can be darker than our first. So I spray about 6 inches from the cake, and I went at an angle here because I don't need it to be exact. It actually looks good if it doesn't look too much like a stencil but more like a painting. So if a little spray gets underneath the lines, that's fine. And for the top of the cake, we don't really have to worry about getting any overspray on the sides of the cake, just by the angle of it. And just make sure that when you take off the stencil that you don't slide it off. You want to be able to either like peel it off or pick it straight up so we're not sliding any blue across our image. Then after this first layer, put it in the refrigerator to let the airbrush dry and also let the cake firm up again. So take your second layer, the more detailed layer, and make sure you match it directly on top of your first layer. Now this one we are going to want to be very detailed, so you're going to want to spray directly above the stencil so that it's a very exact lines that you get. So you are going to want to spray this a little longer than the last one. Again, remembering to hold down the detailed areas like the beak. Just try not to spray it too much where you see it pooling up, because then it'll become messy and runny. If this does happen, you can just hold a paper towel near it. I'll show you that on the sides later, how that works to just soak up excess. If you take your stencil off and you don't feel like it was dark enough, the safest bet is to go ahead and put that back in the refrigerator, let it dry and firm up, and then clean off that stencil, and then go ahead and do it again. If this isn't working for you some reason, stay tuned, because I do have an exit plan. I always try to have one. If you do hold your finger on there too long and there's a little wet smudge, just go ahead and put it in the refrigerator and let it firm up. And the good news is where you put your finger is going to be where it's still white. So you can take your angled spatula and just try to kind of smear that over. If you're having trouble, you can use my warm blade method, where you warm the blade and then dry it completely, and then it makes it easier to smooth over. Just make sure it's not too hot and that your cake is cold. And obviously just make sure you don't ever put your spatula over a colored part. So see how there's that nice detail, like the bird's chest is lighter. This is how we can give it dimension, and it looks more like a painting than stencil. So we're going to put that back in the refrigerator, let it dry and firm up, and then we're going to move to the sides. So while that's in the refrigerator, you're going to want to prepare your stencil for the sides. So you're going to want to tape parchment paper on either side of the stencil, and then cover up anything you don't want to show up on the sides. For example, for me, it's the bird. I did not cover up my bird because I'm used to stenciling, so I know how to not get it in there. But if you're new to this, I would definitely cover up anything with parchment paper that you don't want on the cake. The edges of the stencil are the most important thing to cover up, because they don't look natural at all when you get overspray, because it's such sharp lines. And again, because of the angle, you don't really have to worry about overspraying to the top of the cake. Just the way that it's angled, it doesn't get to the cake. And you're more likely to ruin the top of the cake by trying to cover it. Also, make sure to clean your stencils while the cake's in the refrigerator. So take your cake out of the refrigerator, and you're going to pin this 4 times, and I would pin it on the parchment paper because it's just easier that way. And just pin it so it's nice and flat against the cake. Again, if there's any parts that aren't flat, you can push down with your finger briefly. And again, we're going to do just a very light dusting on the first layer. So make sure you grab the less detailed stencil. And don't worry about the little pin marks. We'll tap those out at the end. You just kind of tap them out with your pointer finger. Now, if you get some that's a little dripping, you just take some paper towel and you just lightly hold it near where it's pooling, and it'll just soak it right up. Don't press too hard, because you will get the pattern from the paper towel on your cake. Okay, put this back in your refrigerator, let it firm up and dry, and then we're going to grab the more detailed stencil and pin it in the parchment paper. Now, I did not put parchment paper on both sides, but you should do this if you're a beginner. And make sure to pull those pins straight out. And then you're just going to repeat this around the entire cake, refrigerating and drying the cake in between. And as far as placement, make sure that you leave enough white. It can easily get too much. So make sure you leave almost like a pathway. Kind of look at your stencil for the guide. They space it out nicely usually. And I would do the front first, so you make sure you have a nice pattern. So the back of your cake, if you have weird spacing, you can just fill it in or leave it blank, and it's not the main attraction, so it's not as obvious. And then when you're completely done spraying, take it out of the refrigerator and just clean your cake board off with wet and dry paper towel. And then take your angled spatula, cover it in a damp paper towel, and just push the cake board down, and you'll be able to scrape underneath your cake. Just be careful with this and make sure you're really pushing the cake board, like bending it down while you do this. Okay, time for the exit plan, or plan B if you need one. Okay, so if you're getting lots of overspray, just scrape off the frosting, mix it up, and it'll naturally be the color of your overspray. Frost your cake in that, refrost it in that, and if you get overspray, you won't be able to see it. It'll be camouflage. So this is a nice trick. So this is a little different look. It's more of a shadow look, but I think it's still really beautiful. And this is a real quick and dirty job that I did just so you guys could see it. So it can look even better than this. All right, that's it, guys. Now you know how to airbrush stencil a cake to give it a painted effect. I think it's really elegant and beautiful. I think it would make a great Mother's Day cake. Thank you guys so much for watching, and can't wait to see you next time.